And with that, it is my absolute honor to introduce all of you today to award-winning victims' rights expert, advocate, and best-selling author, Jennifer Storm, who will guide us through a mini writing workshop to explore the healing potential of sharing your story through guided writing exercises. I also do invite you to stay until the very end of this webinar, as we have some really exciting announcements and goodies to share with you both from Jennifer and from Hazelton Publishing. While Jennifer was first assaulted at age 12, she turned to alcohol to dull the emotional pain. After a string of childhood traumas, she fell into crack use and self-injurious behavior. Once Jennifer finally found treatment after surviving the last of multiple suicide attempts, she discovered that it was possible to heal her shame. Jennifer Storm has now over 20 years of experience in nonprofit management and governmental relations, combined with a powerful personal story of survival from victimization and addiction. Today, with over 23 years of active recovery, Jennifer has spent her life advocating for victims of crime, having worked with many high-profile cases, including helping victims and survivors of Jerry Sandusky, Bill Cosby, Catholic clergy victims, and thousands of other cases in her 20-year-long career as a victim advocate. The author of several books, including Blackout Girl by Hazelton Publishing, Ms. Storm has received numerous awards for her writing. She has traveled the country giving keynotes, lectures, workshops, and panel discussions regarding victims' rights, LGBTQ rights, addiction, recovery, and civil rights. So Jennifer, with that, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Please do take it away.
Thank you so much. I am so incredibly grateful to be here. It's a wonderful fact that this is the week of gratitude. That's what I prefer to call the holiday that we're about to encroach upon because of its historical, not so great aspects. I like to focus on the gratitude part. And so I am incredibly grateful to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction. Just by way of introduction, you heard a little bit of my story. I'm not going to go into more of that because this is a promise to be a space of inspiration and hope. And while my story has a very inspiring, hopeful ending, its beginning is rather tumultuous. So I encourage you to read the book and to kind of explore my story on your own, but we won't get into that today. But I do want to move on to this, and I realized I need to update this slide because on November 9th, I now have 24 years of active long-term recovery. My sobriety date is November 9th of 1997, and so it is an incredibly important day for me, and a day that I celebrate probably more than my birthday, because it truly was the day that I was kind of given my life back. I spent 10 years in a pretty dark place with addiction. And for me, recovery was a turning point. And it was hard, and it was a lot of hard work. I won't sugarcoat that, but it brought forth a total new reality for me. And a lot of that for me was really anchored in writing. And so what I want to do with you today is talk about writing and try to demystify it, right? I think for a lot of folks, writing can be scary, especially when we talk about writing down maybe the hard stuff. And what I hope is by going through some guided exercises with you today, I can show you not only how important writing can be, what a great tool it can be for you, but maybe also potentially help you dig a little bit deeper into some spaces maybe that have yet to be explored in your own world and in your own history and your own life. Writing may not be a tool for you, and that is okay. I'm thinking if you're here today, you have an interest, and so I'm excited for that. What you will need is some paper, pen. If you have a note section of your phone, that'll work. If you're at a computer, you can just pull up a new document. However you want to be able to kind of jot your thoughts down. I'll give you kind of a couple minutes to do that. I will say for years, I was a heavy handwriting journaler. And I have multiple stacks of journals where I wrote, but I do now almost exclusively journal and write on my computer. Actually, a lot of it through this tiny screen, because I'm a big advocate that you should have with you at all times something to capture your thoughts. And for me, and for most people anymore, we are glued to these tiny screens. The notes section of my phone literally is my living, breathing diary. It is where I jot down basically all the contents of my head. God forbid, if I ever lose this thing and someone find it, they'll have a whole lot to read. But what I find is oftentimes I'm inspired at different points, right? Often I'm inspired while exercising, right, wrong, or indifferent. I've shared before that I wrote the opening chapter to my second memoir during a run on a boardwalk. Like, it just came to me really vividly. And so I ran and ran and ran. And then I ran right into my hotel room and I literally wrote out the first chapter of my second book on the little notepads that the hotel gives you and just scribbled until I had the opportunity to transcribe it. Why it's important to kind of have the ability to capture things like that right away is, I don't know about you, but I have about 1,000,010 thoughts that fly through my brain, sometimes at any given moment, right? And there are things that'll come up that are like these kernels of brilliance. And I always think, oh, I'll remember that. I'll remember that in the morning, right? Because maybe it'll happen as I'm getting ready to doze off. Or sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll have either a vivid dream and I'll have these thoughts. I never remember them. Full transparency. And so I have made it a forced habit to stop, capture those thoughts, even if it's just like strange bullets and I don't really have it all fleshed out. I make it a point to jot it down so that I can return to it, because I will inevitably forget it. So that's your first tip. Try to make sure you always have a way to capture yourself. In the beginning, so writing for me, let's start from the very fundamental place of where I began writing. I started writing as a child. Writing was always a safe place for me. It was always a great way for me to process trauma and grief. I lost my best friend to suicide at 15. And so the first book that I ever wrote was actually a story about that experience. And so writing was just, for whatever reason, my place to process emotion, to deal with grief, to process anguish. It was safe, right? Because it was just me and my thoughts. And rarely was anyone ever invited to read my writing. For a very, very long time, it was just me and the paper. And it was healing for me. It was hard sometimes, but it was really important. When I got clean and sober, and I was in the rehabilitation facility that I had gone to, it was not a trauma-informed facility. So they weren't giving us a lot of tools on how to really, there was really great prescriptive tools on the 12 steps and abstinence and all of that. But there was nothing for the trauma, right? So for me, that kindling, that was just ablaze underneath my addiction, that wasn't being addressed. And thankfully, I met a woman in rehab who told me that her secrets kept her sick. And for whatever reason, I was able to translate that really quickly to my own life. And I realized, okay, it's these secrets. It's this kindling underneath the addiction, underneath the alcoholism, underneath the drug addiction. This is the springboard that is leading me to engage in these behaviors. So for a really long time, I thought drugs and alcohol were my solutions. And I realized, no, they were really my problem. But it meant I had to find other solutions because the kindling was still kind of blazing. So writing for me was that. I didn't feel very safe in the beginning of recovery to talk with other people. I didn't trust a lot of folks, right? And given my history, that's not abnormal at all. And so I began to write on my own in the confines of a notebook, in a journal. And so what I started to discover as I began to kind of take that writing and move it into more of a spiritual practice and more of an intentional practice, right? When I started looking at, maybe I'm actually going to share my story with a broader audience. When I initially started writing, it was solely for the purpose of getting out the context of my head onto paper, so that I could take the power out of it, right? That I could see it outside of the contents of maybe the panic attack I was experiencing or the anxiety I was having. If I put it in writing form in front of me, it allowed me to see it differently. It allowed me to get like one step removed from it so that I could engage my not my reptilian brain, right? So if you know anything about neuroscience in the brain, your reptilian brain is that emotional center. It's what can overwhelm our intellect at times, and it can overwhelm our entire, brain and spirit. And we can sit solely in emotion. What writing did for me was it allowed me to take that emotion and put it on the paper so that I could engage that other side of my brain that was able to apply logic and reason and analytical thinking. And I was able to say, like, oh, That's probably not even real, or that's a thought I'm having about myself that might not even be true. Or here's this really hard experience that I went through. And as I'm looking at it, like, yeah, it was really hard, but I'm here and I survived that. And then I would start to dive a little deeper. Well, what did that look like and how did I do that? So that's a little bit of the work that we're going to do together today. One of the things that is important to understand about writing, especially when you're writing from an emotional place, or if you're writing with the intention to share or publish, which may not be your goal, and that's okay, irregardless of where the final product is going to go, it's important to know what kind of writer you are. What kind of an environment do you need? What allows you to tap into your creativity, right? If it's going to be more of a creative writing piece, or what allows you to tap into those emotional places that might be really hard. What do you need around you? How do you write? Are you a morning writer? Are you someone that might just write throughout the day? Are you someone who's a real, do you like to burn the midnight oil? Do you want to write at night? Those are important things to understand and appreciate about yourself, especially when you enter into like intentional writing, right? Especially if you have a deadline. If you start writing with deadlines, it's really important to understand and appreciate who you are as a writer, and to know when you write at your best and what your timeline is and how much space you need to give yourself. I am an early morning writer for whatever reason. This was not the way I lived my life prior to recovery. Prior, I was the adverse. I would go to bed at 7 a.m. Now I'm usually up by 4 a.m., 5 a.m., and I do my best writing in the morning. It's just my clarity time. It's where my mind is fully ignited and engaged. And so I make sure every day, the first thing I do is I wake up. I might, get changed real quick. Usually the first thing I do is put my laptop in front of me and I write down what's going on. Whether it's with the intention to post that on social media as, an inspirational post, or maybe it's just my own stuff that I'm kind of getting out from the night before, but I write every morning. The other thing that's really important to understand is what do you need around you, especially when you're writing with the intent of kind of digging up some emotions. Do you need candles? Do you need soft music? Do you need a specific lighting? Do you need a certain setting? Would you rather be outdoors? Would you rather be indoors, right? So understanding and appreciating who you are as a writer is really important, because it's really going to help you get the most out of your writing. I find often that if I use music, usually bilateral beats, that's really, really helpful for me when I'm writing about hard things. Or if I have to concentrate and write about something that might not be super emotional, but it might require like a high level of analytical thought. Sometimes I need my brain to really come together and be in sync to do that. If you're not familiar with bilateral beats, certainly look it up, talk to a trusted guider about it, whether that's a counselor or a friend. It can be an incredible, powerful resource to really help kind of calm the brain and create space for you to be able to talk about something hard or write about something hard. And then finally, just really important to set a schedule. If you are writing with the intention to publish, or you're writing with deadlines, then it's important to just have a routine, create a routine for yourself, set benchmarks, set schedules, but also just, be really gentle with yourself too. If you miss a deadline, if you don't do it every day, that's okay. And we're going to get into also why that's important. So let's begin. We're going to dive right into an exercise. So take a deep breath. And I want you to think about a time in your life that was hard. Just sit with that for a moment. What is a time in your life, an experience or a period of time that was really hard? And then I just want you to write down whatever starts to come up in your brain. Whether it's words, whether it's images, just start writing down what is coming up for you. I don't want you to think a lot about it. Don't get bogged down in what you're writing. Don't get bogged down in complete sentences. I just want you to have an immediate reaction when I say, think of an experience that you've had in your life that was hard. Write it down. What do you see about that experience? Visually, what comes to mind? What are you seeing? And write those things down. Are you hearing anything? Are there sounds that are coming awake in your ears? Are you hearing things? If so, write those down. Are there things that are conjuring up a certain smell? Do you smell something? Is the memory of this experience or event bringing forth a scent? And if so, write that down. And finally, how do you feel? What immediate emotions are rising in you? Write them down. And know that regardless of how difficult they are in this moment, I promise you, they are not going to hurt you. I want you to bear witness to those feelings as you write them down. I'm going to kind of give you a couple minutes to do this. And again, there is no right or wrong way to do this exercise. I literally just want you to write down what is coming up for you. It may feel completely disjointed. It might feel totally nonlinear. In fact, in most cases, it's going to feel nonlinear. It's going to feel jumbled. It might not, though. For you, it might be a very clear story that is emerging that you're able to just fully document. Again, just be gentle with yourself. Memory is tricky, especially when we're trying to go back to a memory that may be hard for us, that may be triggering and painful. So give yourself the space and the grace to experience that. And just keep writing. Just keep writing. If you need to draw, if doodling is something, if it feels more like a visual, go ahead and do that too. That's okay too. There's a reason we have graphic novels. Not all stories are words, right? Just take a couple minutes to do that. I'm going to check the chat just to see if there are any questions or thoughts. Given what you have, now what I would like you to do is use that same experience, whatever that hard experience was. And I forgot to mention this, and I apologize. If you were not able to conjure up a hard experience or a traumatic experience or a painful experience, whatever experience came up for you is valid. I want to make that really clear that, if there was something else that rose in you and it felt purposeful, write it down. Using whatever that was, whatever that experience, that situation, whatever came up for you, I want you to think about right now, how are you surviving that? How are you managing that? How are you moving through it? And just write that down. And it could be that you're writing down, I'm not managing this. I don't feel like I'm moving through this. I'm stuck. And those things could be very true and valid for you. What I would like to acknowledge with you, though, is that you're sitting here or standing wherever you are, and you're engaging in this exercise, and you are alive. And in essence, you are currently surviving that. It may feel dysfunctional and incredibly painful. In fact, if it's a situation and experience that you have not been able to really dive into and do a lot of work, that's true. That's very valid, and that's okay. So talk about or write about what's coming up for you. What words, what actions, what thoughts. Think about all of that and just write it down. Again, this could be visual for you. It could be very sparse. There could only be a couple words on your page. That's okay. There could only be one word on your page. That's okay too. This isn't about length. This isn't about creating paragraphs or writing stories. It's just about getting those contents in your head out and onto paper. Also, I want to take a second to just say, if you are really struggling right now with this, it's okay to put the pen down. It's okay to take the hands off the keyboard and breathe. I certainly don't want anyone pushing themselves to a point that's uncomfortable or putting yourself in an extreme painful situation. So do what feels comfortable for you in this moment, and know that there's zero expectations here. You may also just sit here and experience this workshop without writing anything down, and that is valid and okay too. You might not be ready, and that's okay. You might have come to this just because you're curious, and that's awesome. It's a great start. So we just did a really hard thing. Whether you were able to write, even if it's one word, even if you were just able to sit here and experience this process and listen, you did a really hard thing. And thank you for that. It's not easy to show up in hard spaces, especially hard spaces that require or ask us to go to places that are hard, that are painful. It's incredible. It's purposeful. It's enlightening, and it can be life-changing. It also can be incredibly scary. And so it takes time, and no one is perfect. No one does this perfectly. So I want to just give you all an acknowledgement for doing what you just did, just by being here. What I love about recovery, what makes me almost giddy with joy every morning that I have this gift of waking up, right, is that every day offers a whole new page. I get to say how my day goes. I get to say what attitude I'm going to bring to the day. For the most part, I get to say what activities I'm going to engage in, right? Our days are structured. We have jobs, we have kids, we have families, we have things that we're required to do. Our attitude, our feelings, our approach, though, we own that. That's ours. And every day we get to choose how we do that. And even if really bad things happen to us in the past, we have the ability to create the present and the future that we want. Now, it's not easy always, and it requires some work. Sometimes it requires some really hard work. Your feelings, while are a requirement for you to process, to move through experiences and to get to this place we call healing, right, which is a journey, not a destination, they're not going to kill you. I can promise you that. They might be really hard. What they do need is they need a release from your mind, your body, and your spirit. And so I don't know about you, but when I was in the darkness of my addiction, my feelings were things that I feared the most. I ran from them. I did everything I could to avoid feeling anything. And it wasn't until I started doing this work and I started waking up each day and having a couple of days of clarity under my belt and a couple of days of intentional decisions about not using, I started to realize, like, oh, these feeling things, they kind of come and go, right? And I write a lot. I mean, I write a lot in metaphors because I'm a writer, and that's oftentimes what we do. But there's a lot of truth in metaphors, right? And metaphorically speaking, emotions are just like waves. They come. Sometimes they just come and wash over us. Sometimes they come and cleanse us. Sometimes they come like a massive tidal wave and they totally knock us over. Sometimes they rip us under with their strength of their current, and we can feel like we're drowning. They will always retreat, right? They will come and they will go. And that is true for all feelings and emotions, whether it's joy, excitement, happiness, pain, anguish, grief, sadness, right? They all come and go. Just sitting here in this workshop, you have probably had a myriad of emotional experiences, and we're all still sitting here. They come, they go. The most important point is, how do we release these feelings? How do we go from point A to point B? How do we travel through that emotion and offer it the release that it needs to get out of our body? Sometimes this is writing. Sometimes this might be exercise. Sometimes, for me, running used to be a huge release of emotions. My knees have now advised me otherwise, so I cycle. But I have had to learn that different emotions for me require different releases and require different tools. And so over time, through the course of my recovery, I have learned which tools work for me and when. Not all tool is going to work the same every time, right? So sometimes I have to deploy a bunch of different tools, particularly if I'm in a real heightened anxiety place or a real heightened panic place. I might have to deploy a bunch of different tools before I find the one that works. But it's finding those tools and activating them. Writing can be one of those incredibly powerful tools for you. So a couple things, and I'm not going to ask you to share anything that you wrote. I'm not going to. You're more than welcome to once we get to the Q&A. But what you wrote down today is yours and yours alone. If you, like I said, if you want to share it, you're more than welcome to share with us today. If you want to share with me privately, or you want to share with someone you trust privately, I encourage you to do that after this. What I want to start now thinking about is, writing in general and the purpose of writing, and give you kind of some tips and tools that I've learned along the way. Some of these are actual pitfalls, right? Some of these are just really important things. So the first one would be, what are you writing for? Are you writing for yourself, right? Is it more of a journaling? Is it more of a private writing? Are you writing with the intention of just kind of getting things out of your mind and then holding space for that personally? Or are you writing for a public audience? And public can be anything from your social media feeds to your community, to maybe publishing a blog, to going all the way up to public speaking and or publishing a book or some type of a narrative that lives outside of you. And all of these things are valid and wonderful and great. Not everyone likes to share publicly, and that's okay. Not everyone needs to share publicly. That's okay too. A couple things that I really learned though when kind of writing my story and sharing my experience, and a couple things to be mindful of that I would like to pass on to you, is that if you are sharing a story, to be mindful of the other people in your story. What I mean by that is, obviously, we all have our perception of what happened in our lives, and we have our own stories, and they're important and they're incredibly valid. They're not necessarily always the same experience or perception or story that other people who may have been in that story have. So in order to protect yourself and potentially any of those other players in your story, in my opinion, it's always good to just change names. Not fictionalize the story, just change the names so that you're protecting the other individuals that are in the story. Now, sometimes this is really hard to do if you're talking about family or individuals who can be really clearly identified in the story. And so that's when, you have to make a judgment call on, how important is the other player in my experience? Do they need to be named in the story? Or can I get this story across without diving deep into the other players that were engaging in the story? And there's ways to do that. There's creative ways to do that, artistic ways to do that, and we could do a whole session on that. But just to be mindful of that. And some of that is for legal reasons, right? It's protective for you for legal reasons, but really for emotional reasons. If you're sharing your story, it really should be because you're sharing your story. So if you start to get into a space when writing your story that you feel like you're telling someone else's story, then you probably have left the space of like memoir and you're writing maybe more of someone else's story. So that's a real easy way to be mindful of catching yourself when you're doing that. If you're writing from someone else's perspective, that is not memoir writing. That would be more fictional. That would be more biographical. And so try to always put it back in I statements and center it around your experience. If you are going to publish, I would also encourage you very much to protect your work. And protect your work regardless. Even if you're not going to publish, right? You may be writing for very personal reasons, and it may be in a journal, it could be in a diary. If you want it to remain sacred to you and you only, try to protect it. Whether that means you write and then you burn it so that you destroy it, so that there's zero evidence of what you've written, totally valid. You are free to destroy what you just wrote today if that's your purpose. Totally respect that. It's an incredible tool. It might mean that you lock certain documents on your computer. Might mean that you put a physical lock on your journal, right? Protect yourself, protect your story. If it is for public consumption, copywriting your story is really important. The cheapest, easiest poor man's way to copyright something, or poor woman's way to copyright something, is to literally print it out, put it in an envelope, self-address it, stamp it, put it in the mail, and have it mailed back to you, and don't open it. The date on that then serves as your copyright legally in court. Super simple. There's also other formal ways with the Library of Congress, and in Canada, there are other ways very clearly to copyright your materials if you want to take it a step further. If you're a part of, if you want to write a script or a screenplay, there's other ways to protect your work. But protect your work because, we want to believe the best in people, but there are people out there that might steal your ideas or steal your thoughts, and you certainly want to make sure you're protecting yourself. When you're writing about deeply personal things and sharing experiences, the one thing I would really let you know is that be ready to be contacted. Be ready to be very exposed, right? When you write for publication and you put your story out there, you will immediately get feedback. And that feedback might not necessarily always be great. Sometimes the feedback is intense and wonderful, and it comes by way of emotional connection, right? It comes by way of those Me Too moments, right? Where people immediately read what you wrote and they're like, that's me, I get it. And then those people reach out to the author to connect. Be ready for that, because that in and of itself can be really wonderful and incredible and purposeful. It can also be really draining, right? So just be mindful that once you hit send, whether it's via email, on social media, to a publisher, once you put it out into the world and into the universe, you can't get it back. So just be sure, be ready. Also, if you're writing and sharing your story in large spaces, be ready for the emotional toll that's going to take on you. You're going to be reliving your traumatic experience, or an experience that may be really hard and painful. So safeguard that process by kind of bookending self-care, right? Make sure you're engaging in self-care prior to any public launch or public engagement, and make sure you're bookending on the other end ways to decompress and de-stress, because this work is really hard. And when it's done fully, while I've never left a speaking engagement feeling worse, that has never happened to me, I have left a speaking engagement feeling exhilaratingly exhausted. It's like the best word I could use. I love speaking. I love sharing my story. I love doing these things, but I leave a piece of myself with others. And so I have to replenish that space, and I've got to hold it sacred, right? Because I want to make sure I can do it again and again. So just be mindful and be aware of what you need to kind of center yourself in those moments. Set really clear boundaries, right? What are you okay with talking about? What are you not okay with writing about? What are those non-negotiables? What are you okay with, and what are you really protective of? And that might kind of come with time, right? As you're kind of diving into your writing and diving into your story, you may start to realize, like, oh, this situation I thought I was comfortable with sharing is actually completely off limits. And know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. 100% okay. This is your life. This is your experience. This is your story. This is your sacred space. And it is okay for you to set very clear boundaries. Those are probably the best tips that I can give you, especially when you're really looking to kind of take your story outside of yourself. But certainly there might be some questions, and I would love to answer those. The other thing I'm going to say is, obviously you might be looking at what you just wrote, and you might be saying, I don't know what this is. This is a mess. Or maybe you might be saying, this is brilliant. I'm so excited. Know that this is the first step. And for me, the best writing happens in the revisions and in the rewriting. So I will often sit down, write a whole lot of stuff out, and then I walk away, and then I have to come back and I revisit it, especially when you're writing about really hard things. When I was writing Blackout Girl, I thought going into it, okay, the really hard parts are going to be going back and capturing the sexual assaults. And I was actually incredibly surprised that the hardest thing for me to write was actually my best friend's suicide at 15. And there were times when I was typing and writing, and my computer, literally my keyboard, felt like it was on fire. And there were times I had to do this, and I literally had to get up and physically walk away from the computer. And that's okay. I needed to be able to give myself that space to process what I had conjured and then come back. And that chapter took me the longest of every chapter in Blackout Girl to write. And that's okay. That's how it was supposed to go. So know that writing does not need to be linear. You do not need to know if you want to write a book, you don't need to know how it's going to start and how it's going to end. I mean, you want a rough outline. Outlines are great. They're better and more purposeful for schools, right? If you have to write a paper in school. For me, with creative writing, it's more about just writing. Just get out what you want to say. Just put one word in front of the other, because eventually that'll make a sentence, and then that'll make a paragraph. And before you know it, you'll have a page. You'll have a chapter. You might have a blog post. You might have a book. But just write. Just engage the act of writing and leave the rest till later, right? There's a reason that most writers need brilliant editors. I'm a writer that needs a brilliant editor, because when I'm writing, it's very stream of conscious. So I'm not thinking about grammar. I'm not thinking about spelling. I'm just getting it out. It's just like, ugh, it's like a dump. for me. And then sometimes I have to hand that dump over to a really skilled editor to say, something's in here, find it, right? And that's okay. It's okay if you're not punctual, and if you don't have great grammar. I am a writer that does not have that, but that doesn't mean that I don't have something really powerful to say. And that doesn't mean that you don't have something really powerful to say. So hopefully all of these tips have given you a little bit of a kernel of understanding of writing and creating a writing process. And hopefully you got some stuff down on paper. And I want to be mindful that it is 2:40, and I really want to get to questions, understanding and appreciating that we have, this wonderful private space here on the webinar. So I will not call out your name. If you answer a question, I will not identify you, but also we're live on Facebook. And so we want to be mindful too that this is a very public forum. And you may not be comfortable in any way, shape, or form in talking at all or posing a question. So this is my business card, and my email is on there. It is literally just jenniferstorm119, my sobriety date, @gmail.com. So if you have a question or you have a thought, please just reach out to me. I'm also all over social media. I live on Instagram, and I need to update that. It's no longer Storm119. I changed it to Blackout Girl Author. So if you go on Instagram to find me, it's Blackout Girl Author. DM me, send me a private message. I will respond to you. I'm on Facebook as well, and I'm also on Twitter. So please just find me, and I will respond. That I promise you. These are the books that I have. They are available at all booksellers, as well as most libraries, with the exception the journal will not be found at a library. But that can be purchased on any bookseller that you have or through Hazelden. Or if you want things autographed and personalized for the holiday season or for any other season, you can do that directly through my website, which is just my name, jenniferstorm.com. And now I want to end and just open it up. And I guess I'll have Lisa come back and see if we've got some questions or curiosities or thoughts.
There are lots of reflections and curiosities coming through. Thank you so much for that. There's quite a few people that have said they for sure need to rewatch and go through this again, because you just delivered so many incredible gems and affirming things. Because I'm sharing this because I feel like perhaps there might be other people in this space who can relate. But for the recovering perfectionist, especially in the room, hearing things that you don't have to have good grammar to be a writer. Wow, mind blown. First time I've ever heard that, that, a rewrite is not only okay, but a part of the process that you have as a writer. And, that the story may take us on a journey of transformation beyond what we may have started with. Like, I loved hearing that, we're kind of traveling the story that we're writing as we're going along. And what a wonderful invitation that it could transform into something completely different or something beyond what we ever expected. So there's just a few, permissions that I heard there at the end that I'd like to reiterate, because, I do feel that perhaps I'm not alone in this experience of being affirmed in that it's okay for it to be a journey, right? One of the reflections I saw come through a couple of times as well was that the best advice that someone had ever gotten was to just write, and edit later. So that was like being reverberated throughout the chat on Facebook as well. One of the first questions that we have is, do you have a favorite blog forum? So perhaps I could interpret this as a favorite blog forum for inspiration or to connect with other writers.
So I do a lot of blogging on Elephant Journal. I like that space because I can be really raw and I can be myself. I don't tend to be I can be a little vulgar, Trauma's not pretty and cute all the time. And so I like Elephant Space because I can bring my whole self there, or Elephant Journal, sorry. So I really like that one. Honestly, I love the She Recovers forum. And I often come on to that space just to hear what other folks are going through and what they're experiencing. I try when I have capacity to lend my voice to those spaces as well. I think the community that She Recovers has built is just this beautiful and inspirational, wonderful network of hope and journey and struggle. So I love that. And then you're going to laugh at me, but my Peloton is like one of my saving graces. I'm a big cycler. And so I'm in a lot of communities on Facebook on my Peloton. Like I'm in an LGBTQ community, I'm in a mom's community, and just in those spaces. But Elephant Journal is probably one of my favorite in terms of online blogs.
Very cool. Thank you. And yeah, it's remarkable, where the creative genius shows up, right? And if it's the Peloton, you just keep showing up on the Peloton. I'm imagining, that part of your process kicking into play.
I literally sit my phone on my Peloton bike, mainly because I have a crew and we chat while we're riding, but it's usually because stuff comes up for me for whatever reason. Exercise conjures my creative. And so often, even sometimes when I'm sitting in meditation, I have my phone nearby because I might just get this thought and I'll jot it down real quick. So.
Right on. And this question's actually been asked in a few different ways. So I'll bring forward one from the webinar. But they've said, when you began the process of approaching publishing, were you concerned that someone may had already told a story similar to yours, or that it may not be unique enough? I'm afraid that my story won't be unique enough. And how do you find a niche to differentiate your experience in a world full of trauma?
So first of all, beautiful human, your story is unique because it is yours. Period, full stop, right? I decided to publish my story in 2008 because as a reader, I wasn't finding my story reflected back on the bookshelves. But that was a very different time and space, right? We didn't have a lot of people talking about trauma. We certainly didn't have a lot of people speaking about sexual violence, right? I think it was myself and Mackenzie Phillips. That's how I met Mackenzie years and years ago, because she and I would end up showing up in these similar spaces, having the same conversation. Fast forward to today, and we have this beautiful crescendo of voices sharing their traumatic experiences and sharing their life stories. And it's wonderful. And there's room for every single one of these beautiful stories. So don't diminish yourself. Know that your story is important. It doesn't have to be niched in any way. It's a story, right? And memoirs and writing and blogs and publication, that's all about storytelling. I would say find the stories that are similar to yours, right? Go to your library, go to your bookstore, or go online and find people who are publishing stories like yours, whether it's blog sites, whether it's publishers. That's what brought me to Hazelden. I started to look at, what am I reading? Who do I love? Who might be willing to publish my story? And again, my lens is a little bit different because it was this was a long time ago. It was 13 years ago. But I would look for like-minded spaces, because if they're already in this space publishing these kinds of stories, then they're already interested in your story. They just haven't heard it yet. And then you pitch them, you approach them, there's a whole craft to pitching your story. But truly, it's like a cover letter. It's like an application for a job, right? You just have to be able to know, what is my story about? What am I hoping, what am I trying to translate by telling this story? And what are those other stories out there that are similar to mine? Like, why is mine relevant? If there are 5 other stories out there, that doesn't mean yours isn't relevant. It means yours is really relevant because there's others out there. They just don't have your specific voice.
That's so beautifully stated, because I remember the first time I picked up your book, Blackout Girl, there was just something, of course, there's incredible trauma in the world and we all have similar and shared experiences, but there was something in the way that you brought that story forward that really resonated and called, a piece of healing within me. So I appreciate hearing that reflected back, right? Because I experienced that as a reader in your writing. Another question was, and I know that you did touch on this earlier in the presentation, but in your own writing, did you ever get a trigger or experience a trauma response as though you were reliving some of those experiences that you were writing about? And if so, what did you do to move through that and carry on?
Yeah. So like I said, the hardest thing I wrote about was my best friend's suicide at 15. And I clearly had not processed that in the way that I thought I did. Right. And so what I did was I gave myself a lot of grace and a lot of space. I allowed myself to be human. I allowed myself to write and then stop when I needed to write. There were times when I would push myself gently to maybe get through. Right. So you have to, and this is a hard balance, knowing when to push yourself and knowing when to peel back. And so Crying is normal. Having anger is normal. Experiencing panic and anxiety and all of those emotions, it's a really normal process when writing. There were just, I don't know how to explain it. Like I said, it was like my keyboard would be, it was like it was on fire and I no longer could touch it. That's when I knew I need to honor that and I need to walk away. And usually that also meant that I got into a bubble bath with a lot of candles and a lot of Sarah McLachlan and just let it all out, right? I did the thing that helps me access those emotions. Because I was a person for 10 years who ran from all of those feelings and emotions, I had to relearn how to feel. And sometimes that meant I had to create specific environments and spaces that felt safe enough for me to feel. For whatever reason, for me, the bathtub is one of those spaces. It was very important for me early on in recovery, and it still rings true to this day. And I had to do all the things. I had to do all the sensory experiences. And I didn't realize at that time what I was doing, right? But but now understanding trauma, knowing triggers, and that it is sensory, now I get it. I'd have to have the eucalyptus. I would need the soft lighting, the lights out, but candles, having enough light to feel safe, but not dim enough to feel calm. And I had to have the right music that put me in a mindset that said, you now have permission to feel. And then I would cry, and I would just sit in the bathtub, and I would let the heaving sobs just come out of me. And I would eventually get to a point where I could actually wrap my arms around myself and I could comfort myself. And that took time, took a long time. But it became some of the most important healing, transformative work that I ever did in terms of my own personal recovery.
So beautiful, because something that you mentioned at the beginning was not all stories are words. And what I'm hearing you do, right, is nurturing this sort of untold part of your body's wisdom, and caring and tending to that. So what a reparative experience. And eucalyptus, hello. So I just actually wanted to bring forward a reflection. Our CEO and Executive Director, Susan Carter, is joining us through Facebook Live. So I'm throwing her name out into the cauldron today. But she says, thank you so much, Jennifer. These are great tips from an amazing author. And what comes from my heart comes out of my hand. And I just think that that's such a beautiful sentiment for anybody who's listening, to have that, that mind-body connection, and to just get started, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else has asked, did you ever struggle to call yourself a writer? And if so, was there a moment in time when you realized that you had a talent for writing or knew that you did have a story that needed to be shared?
Yeah, it's funny. I still sometimes hesitate to call myself a writer or an author, even though I've published 5 books, because there is almost a humility in it. And I think because I am not an academic writer, I am not I was deep in my addiction during my entire academic history, right? So middle school into high school, middle school, junior high, and high school, I was completely inebriated. So I didn't really participate in English class. I barely showed up. And when I did, I was failing things left and right. When I went to college, I tested so poorly in English and math that I had to take remedial math and remedial English at Penn State. And so that was obviously very humbling. I couldn't tell you today, what a conjure verb, I don't even know how to say those things. So grammatically, I'm a hot mess. And usually every time I write something, there is an error. There is not one post that I have not had to go back and edit. And I just consider it my humility barometer at this point. I don't do anything without an error, and that's just my staple. And so, yeah, there have been times where I've been I'm not really a writer, Jen, because, you don't know how to put a semicolon in the proper place always. I mean, I'm getting there, but I have Grammarly on everything, right? But again, writing isn't about all of that structural stuff. It can be, and that's great writing and really powerful, moving writing. For me, the best stories are the ones that move me emotionally, the ones that can bring me into a scene, the ones that can pull me into their experience. And that's visual writing. That doesn't have to be, like I said, grammatically correct, because your editor will make it grammatically correct for you. See, I can't even say the book. So yeah, there's definitely times where I'm oh my God, I'm a writer. I have books, people have read my stuff. Yeah, so there are times when I struggle with that.
Thank you for your transparency so much. And on the topic of editor, then, what do you suggest to, like, how did you find your editor, or what did you look for in an editor when you felt ready to publish your book?
Yeah, so I made a couple of mistakes. Initially, I thought, oh, this has to be really polished and perfect before it goes to a publisher. And that's not 100% accurate. What publishers are really looking for is there something here? Is there meat on these bones, right? Maybe the bones are a little broken, maybe they're not in the right place, but if there's meat on those bones, a publisher is going to latch onto you because they know that they've got editors in-house that can clean it up for you. So I made the mistake of thinking, oh, I need this to be perfect. And I went on, I forget if it was Craigslist or something back then, and hired a writer. And I spent a stupid amount of money having someone else attempt to edit my story, and just, it didn't work out very well. They didn't get it. They didn't understand my voice. It wasn't a good situation. Then I found an editor that was wonderful and beautiful. And she really helped me get my materials to a point where I thought, okay, I can start submitting this to publishers. But here's the thing. Once you get a publisher, they're going to give you another editor anyway. And that editor is going to just redline and rip your manuscript to shreds, because that's their job. They're supposed to do that. Any good editor is going to have a tremendous amount of feedback. And so that's when you have to make creative decisions, right? So for me, the editing process is the most fun process for me, but it's painful. Like, I'll get a document back and I'm like, oh my God, did I have anything good to say? And, once I get through, a lot of it is like ends up being grammatical, or just kind of, maybe asking me to go a little bit further. The best writing, though, like I said, is in that rewrite. So it's when that editor says, this is golden, but man, there's more. Like, I know there's more here. Or you might have actually, this is a little this is duplicative. So you might want to just take out this sentence because you clearly stated it here. So that's where editors are really good at just refining you and helping you also shape your voice. And they're going to make you a better writer because you're going to be learning as you go. So, I highly respect writers. I use them in every facet of my life. And but the nice thing is once you have a strong publisher or any publishing house, they're going to have an editing staff. Now, if you want to start a blog, if you're looking to self-publish, then you will need to kind of go out into the marketplace and find a strong editor and find someone. But I would interview them and really read their work and look at their work and make sure that they're going to be reflective of your voice before you start paying a lot of money, because it can get really expensive.
Brilliant. Thank you. We're just coming up to the top of the hour. Unfortunately, I won't get through all the questions, but I got two more that I'd like to bring forward here. And someone has asked if trauma-informed editors are a thing, if you know of that, like if you have a story that is, filled with a fair bit of trauma, if there are editors out there that know how to speak, to the general audience in a trauma-informed way.
Such a good question. I would assume, I don't know that there's like a burgeoning market, but I don't know. I mean, that would be an interesting Google. Like, I'm going to Google that after this to see, like, are people billing themselves as trauma-informed writers or editors? I would look for editors of memoirs, right? You might find it more in a nonfiction space. So like nonfiction editors, memoir editors, they may be billing themselves that way, but that's a great and brilliant idea. And hopefully if there are any editors listening to this, not a bad idea to say, like, I can take a tough story and walk somebody through it. It's a great selling point. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, if there are any editors listening, please know that there are folks that need that out there. Do you have any suggestions or cures for a vulnerability hangover?
Oh, self-care. For me, it's giving, well, first of all, it's not diving right back into another vulnerable space, right? So timing that properly, always giving yourself downtime, and finding what is it that helps you restore, right? Because anytime you're vulnerable, you deplete yourself a little bit. So what fills you back up? For me, it's going to a movie, it's exercising, it's reading, it's connecting and laughing with friends. So maybe that's a game night. But making sure I find those spaces to refill my bucket. This past weekend, I had a keynote at Virginia Beach, and then I made sure to tack on 2 days to play with my little kiddo in the sand on the beach, and we totally restored that way. And so it's building those spaces. I'm a big fan of massages. That's not obviously an option for everyone if touch is something that's not comfortable. Maybe it's a manicure, getting a pedicure, just whatever it is that kind of helps you be anywhere but in that space.
Perfect. Thank you. And is there a way for folks to connect? I know that you did a mini session with us today. Do you have a larger body of work? Because there are lots of questions that remain unanswered, as well as people curious to know, how do they go about finding a publisher? So do you have a workshop geared toward?
I've done several workshops on just getting published. And what I jokingly say that I learned how to get published just through my own trial and error and my own experiences. So yes, I've done, actually, I haven't done them in a while. I would love to do a full one. I used to do them very early on because a lot of folks, if you're not in the publishing industry and you don't have an agent, it's so hard. Yeah. So I could definitely do that. Just reach out to me on any of the social media platforms, email me, go onto my website. But yes, I can tailor workshops to that topic easily.
That's so brilliant. Thank you so much. And as we were talking about in our opening remarks, Jennifer's got a really groovy gift to share with everybody who's listening today and anybody who participates in the She Recovers Giving Tuesday and 12 Days of Recovery campaigns that we're about to launch. She shared with us that she's willing to provide our top donor with a signed copy of her book. So we're so grateful for that offer. I mean, it's definitely going to motivate me to raise some good cash for the foundation. And Hazelton Publishing is also offering 25% off all of all of the gifts and books through their online bookstore until December 31st, as well as a 12 book set for our 12 Days of Recovery giveaway that we're doing on Instagram. So we're so grateful to you and to Hazelton and Betty Ford Foundation and to Hazelton Publishing for participating in this. And if anyone listening wants to get the goods, wants to be the first to know about how to participate and win, please do visit sherecovers.org to join the newsletter, or go right over to give.sherecovers.org/fundraisers to make a donation on Giving Tuesday. So you can get a direct email into your inbox about all of those groovy discount codes and offers. And thank you so much, Jennifer. I know we could be here for hours. I'm talking about this. We're incredibly grateful, as always, for your time and your energy and your grace. So thank you for sharing your heart and your expertise with our community today.
Absolutely. Hazelton is also looking for writers to be a part of an anthology, basically a meditation book. So if you have any interest in writing, Hazelton is actually actively recruiting writers who are not writers, right? So writers who don't think they're writers. So definitely visit Hazelton's website to learn a little bit more about that. And I'm excited to I'm going to give an autographed copy of both Blackout Girl, Awakening Blackout Girl, and a copy of the journal. So whoever is the top gift raiser for She Recovers during Giving Tuesday, you're going to get all three of those from me. So yes, please donate to this incredible community.
Incredible. Thank you so much.